I feel like I've started every video this year the exact same way, so why change things now? Today I'm going to be filming a video that I haven't done in a very long time, and that is a book haul, specifically my 2020 book haul. And on the topic of books that I purchased in my library, I did want to briefly just bring up that in the past I've talked about how I wanted to get my library down to 30% TBR and 70% read, and I'm finally sitting right pretty much exactly at 30% TBR, which has always been kind of a milestone on the way to getting my TBR down to 25% of my library versus 75% read. That's kind of my ideal, but I am to that milestone that I've had for like years, so I'm very content with that. And you may have noticed I've added this extra 4-cube shelf over here because this was getting really cramped, and with some weird finagling from my organization, I ended up putting actually all my TBR books in these 4 cubes right here. So this is the TBR, at least, that I have out and not packed away in boxes. Because if you've been around my channel for a little while, you may know that this is not all the books that I own. I actually have a lot packed away. This is just what I have space for right now. If you go back to like 2019, like January and before that, those videos, you'll see all my books behind me, but this is what I have out right now, and the stats that I gave you is all of my books. But I digress, I'm rambling. We're here to talk about the books that I purchased in 2020. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm going to be attempting to go in as close to chronological order as possible. Not sure that'll actually work out, but we'll see. First up, I have volumes 1 through 3 of the Danganronpa 2 manga. This is a manga series that is based on my personal favorite video game trilogy, and this is kind of an alternate like retelling of the second game. It's weird, the first Danganronpa manga series was just basically an adaptation of the first game, whereas this is telling the story of the second game from a different character's perspective, which is just a little weird. The premise of Danganronpa is essentially that these students who are very elite in their specific fields are invited to this very elite academy called Hope's Peak Academy, but upon arrival, things are not exactly as they seem. They're essentially trapped against their will and forced into a killing game where if they want to escape, they must kill a fellow student and get away with it. It's just right up my alley because it's a little bit battle royale-esque, it's a little bit murder mystery, and I just love every element of it. It's really fantastic. I didn't love the manga adaptation of the first game, but I'm very curious to see what this like spin-off manga has in store for me. Next up is The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, which is book 3 in the Truly Devious trilogy. This came out in, I think, January or early February, and I pre-ordered it because I love this trilogy and I read it the day it came out. Continuing with this like murder mystery at a school, dark academia thing, our main character Stevie is accepted to this private high school where students who are very elite in specific fields are accepted to go and study, and this sounds like exactly like Danganronpa so far, but I promise it is somewhat different. Stevie's thing is true crime, and Stevie wants to attend this school because back in the 30s when the school was founded, the founder's family went missing and no one has ever solved this mystery, and Stevie wants to do it because she's very intrigued by this mystery. The story is told in 2 different timelines. Firstly, Stevie going to school there and weird things start happening, and also in the past in the 30s when this first disappearance happened, and it goes back and forth between the two as Stevie tries to uncover what is currently happening to her at the school and what happened in the past and how they might be related. As I mentioned, I really enjoyed this trilogy. This one I believe I gave 4 stars out of 5. Very good, very solid conclusion. Overall, I enjoyed it. Next is The King of Crows by Libba Bray, which is the 4th and final book in the Diviners series. One of my favorite ongoing series. I've read the first 2 books. I have not yet read this one, but I loved the first 2 books and I really need to finish this series because it could be a new all-time favorite, like top tier series once I finally get to this. If you haven't heard of this series, it takes place in 1920s Flapper, New York City, and it follows this cast of characters who are almost exclusively all diviners, which means that they have these very specific special like magical supernatural abilities. The first book has a full 5 stars for me. The second one was like 9 out of 10, 4.5 out of 5 is still fantastic, and I just really need to finish this because I know I'm gonna love them. The next 2 books are by the same author, and those are The Familiar Volume 2 and Only Revolutions by Mark Z. Danielewski. This is the same author who wrote House of Leaves, which I read last fall and really enjoyed, and all of his books are really weird, and that's why I'm very intrigued by him as an author. All of his books also include like some sort of unique or weird formatting, which I always enjoy. I haven't read either of these yet, and honestly I don't know what exactly they're about because he's just one of those authors who writes books that are so weird you don't really know how to describe the premise. But then again, that's one of the reasons why they're really intriguing to me. Next up is some manga that's all by the same author, although from 2 separate series, and that is Judge and Secret by Yoshinki Tonogai. This is the same author who wrote the Doubt manga series that I read earlier this year, and these 2 series have pretty similar premises, although Doubt, I believe, is the most well-known of their works. Judge, I believe, has 6 volumes, so I have half of them, and then I think Secret has 3, so I just have the first one. From what I understand, all of these series have pretty similar premises to the first one, which is essentially that a group of people is gathered together for one reason or another, like trapped in a place, and they have to like kill one of them, or they have to choose who dies, or something along those lines, where it's like a group of either people who know each other or strangers, and they choose someone to die or actually kill each other. I feel like I don't even need to explain that at this point because I just think that I've made it very clear that these type of like death games really intrigue me. I don't know why. I don't know. Next up, I have another manga, which is volume 1 of number 6. Honestly, I don't have an incredibly clear idea what this specifically is about, but it is very dystopian sounding, and the main character is a student, and it sounds like there are like mysterious goings-on happening, which like isn't that every book ever, but still sounds very intriguing, even though I only have a vague idea of what it's about. Next up is All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban, which wins the award for my favorite cover of the year so far. Honestly, this is just one of my favorite book covers ever. I think this is a really cool cover. This is one that I have already read. It's a little bit Breakfast Club, it's a little bit Agatha Christie, and it's a little bit Saw. Basically, this group of students who fit like high school stereotypes are all invited to the scholarship dinner on false pretenses. They show up, they get locked in the room, and they find this like bomb, and the instructions say that they have to kill someone if they want to get out alive. Obviously, hearing that premise, this isn't just like right up my alley. It is directly in the center of my alley. It is everything I could ever want. And I ended up liking it. It wasn't amazing, but I liked it. I ended up giving it 3 stars out of 5. I liked it, but I found the characters to be pretty bland. The writing wasn't amazing, and I also thought that it was kind of predictable, but it was a fun ride. Next up is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Honestly, this was completely not even on my radar until I heard the premise, and I was immediately intrigued because firstly, it just sounded like a Murakami premise, which is always a good thing. And secondly, it just sounded a little bit like surrealist or magical realism, which is something that really intrigues me. Basically, it sounds almost a little bit like Alice in Wonderland-esque, where our main character discovers this like door that whisks him away to a magical world. I don't know anything past that, but it just sounds really cool and whimsical, and like I said, a little bit like magical realism, surrealist. Next up is Grotesque by Natsuno Kirino. One of the things about being in like the booktube bubble is that I never really stumble across books organically. I always am looking for certain books that I've heard of, or like looking for books that people talk about on booktube, etc. And over the past couple of years, I've tried to be better about coming across books organically. And like if I see something in a bookstore and I read the premise and it sounds really cool, not immediately trying to like find it on booktube or like look it up on Goodreads, and just getting it because it sounds cool. This is not a novel concept at all, but like when you get in the booktube sphere, sometimes you don't consider books that you've never heard of before. And this is why I ended up picking up this one, because I saw it at Half Price Books and it sounded really cool. Basically, this seems like a psychological thriller centered around these girls who have died, and it goes back into their past at this private school they attended and the ways that that might have affected their life going forward. Seems very like dark and very mysterious, and those are all things I love. That's literally all I know about this. I've never heard anyone talk about it. I just saw it in bookstores like 3 or 4 times, and it looked really intriguing and it sounded really cool, and so I picked it up. Next up is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. On the flip side of the last one, this is one I'd heard of for quite a while on BookTube before actually discovering the premise and then getting really intrigued. Essentially, Evelyn Hardcastle, I believe, dies, and our main character is trying to figure out what happened, but they are stuck in this like Groundhog Day-esque loop where if they don't figure it out within that day, the day resets and they're put in someone else's body, I believe. Honestly, it just kind of sounds like your basic whodunit, but made more complex and intriguing, and it just sounds really, really fascinating and really cool. And I'm very, very intrigued to check this out. I've been meaning to pick this up for months now, and I have not done so, but I want to read this very badly. And once again, that's another that's compared to Agatha Christie, which, like we all know, I love Agatha Christie novels, so very intrigued. Next up is another manga series, this time in its entirety, and that is The Seven Princes of the Thousand-Year Labyrinth. This is a 4-volume manga series that I read during my 30-day manga challenge and overall really enjoyed. I believe that I ended up giving all of these 3 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5, basically, which just means I liked them. The specifics are eluding me right now. I don't remember every single detail, but essentially the premise of this is that these 7 individuals are put into this like labyrinthian castle, and in order to become the king, they have to escape. Overall, I like this series. It's not one of those that's going to like become a new favorite or gonna stick with me for a super long time because like I mentioned, I'm already forgetting some details, but this was a like quick fun read rather than like a new all-time favorite. Speaking of a new all-time favorite, next up is the entire Erased manga series. The edition that I have here is the 4-volume English omnibus version. Essentially, this was originally published in 8 volumes in Japanese, and they're combined into 4 volumes for the English release, so this is the first 2, so on and so forth. While I enjoyed the entire series as a whole, this volume right here was the first one to break my dry spell with 5-star ratings because I fell completely in love with this. The premise of this is that our main character has this time travel ability that he doesn't really have control over. Like if something bad happens around him, he gets stuck in this like time loop going back in time a minute or 2 until he can fix the problem. But then when this major giant catastrophic thing happens, he finds himself going all the way back in time to his childhood when he was, I believe, 10. Because essentially this big major thing that happens in his current day plotline is related to something that happened in his past where a lot of young children went missing in the town he was from. So basically he's trying to solve the mysteries from the past in order to fix the present. This actually really reminded me of the Orange manga series, which I also really love because it deals with time travel and there's a lot of like heartwarming friendships that are really important, and this is just overall like a really touching and beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. It is possibly it's not my all-time favorite manga, again, because Death Note still exists, but I really love this. Highly, highly, highly recommend. I also enjoyed the anime. Love this story so much. Next up is The Crimson Labyrinth by Yusuke Kishi. Our main character wakes up in this like labyrinth that's entirely red, having no idea where he is or how he's gotten here. He quickly discovers that he and this group of other people have been just basically abandoned in this labyrinth, and they don't know why, they don't know what the purpose is, they don't know what's happening. They're basically just abandoned with no resources, and while they're all just struggling to try and survive in this labyrinth, the real thing that they need to be worried about surviving is each other. I'm not sure how else to describe this. The back describes it as Lost meets Battle Royale. I have not seen Lost, but I've always wanted to watch it, and I love Battle Royale, and I think that's an apt comparison. And overall, this was an enjoyable read. I liked it. It's another I gave like 3 stars out of 5. I enjoyed it. Although I enjoyed this book, it's definitely not without its flaws. It is about 20 years old and it does show its age through some of the terminology used and some of the language used and stuff talked about, which I didn't really appreciate. But apart from those aspects, this was overall a very intriguing read. Next up is the Another Manga Omnibus. The premise of this is that our main character moves to this small Japanese town and he joins this class of students that is supposedly cursed. Mysterious things are happening. He's trying to figure out what's even going on because he can't get a straight answer from anyone. He's just really confused. And basically he's trying to figure out, is this curse real? What's actually happening here? All that kind of good stuff. This story was originally published as a novel, which I read back in like May and June. The book was like a 3.5 star out of 5 read. I enjoyed it. It's not a new all-time favorite, but it was a pretty solid solid read. I was very tempted to give it 4 until the very end, which I thought was a little bit disappointing, but I did enjoy it enough that I wanted to watch the anime, and I usually like reading the manga before I watch an anime, so that's my plan with this. Next up is another manga omnibus, and that is the Uzumaki omnibus by Junji Ito. Junji Ito is like super famous for his horror manga, and I have not read anything he's ever published. But this is one that I hear mentioned a lot as like one of his best manga, or at the very least a good place to start. And so that's why I got this one, because I'm very intrigued to check this out, because I love horror, but I'm never actually scared or creeped out by anything. So hopefully he can do that. The premise of this is also very intriguing to me, because it's essentially that spirals start taking over this town. Like, what does that even mean? I don't know, but I'm very intrigued to find out. Next up is the most annoying book to say the name of ever, and that is Colorless Tsukuru Tasaki and His Years of Pilgrimage by Haruki Murakami. It took me so many times to say that correctly. I really like Murakami. I've read a handful of his novels now, and this is one of the ones that has most intrigued me. This is one of his more like actually realistic novels, which is very different from the surrealist ones I typically pick up, but the premise is very intriguing. Basically, our main character goes back to his hometown, and like no one is talking to him and everyone's just ignoring him, and he's trying to figure out what about his past has caused this to happen. Pretty vague, but it sounds really intriguing, and I always enjoy Murakami, so very intrigued to check this out. And then the last two on the list are by the same author, and that is The Guest List and The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. These are whodunit murder mysteries that have been compared to And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Do I need to say any more? This is her newest book. I believe it was just published this year. And in this one, there's like a wedding party that gather on the coast of Ireland, and one of them dies. Similarly, in this one, a group of friends from college go on a trip together, I'm assuming to somewhere snowy because the cover looks snowy. And I think one of them dies, and one of them did it. It's a simple premise, but it gets me every time. These are two of the books that are highest on my TBR. I want to check them both out immediately. So those are all the books that I've purchased so far in 2020. I haven't counted them, but there are quite a few of them, some which I've read, some which I haven't, but the ones that I haven't read yet, I'm very intrigued to pick up. Overall, 2020 has just been a much better year for reading and for booktubing and everything bookish for me than the past couple of years. So I'm just in a very good place with reading, and I'm really just enjoying reading again, which I haven't done in a while. That's a bit of an exaggeration. I never stopped enjoying reading. There was just a pretty extensive period of time where I wasn't reading very much, and although I'm still not reading as voraciously as I read 4 to 5 years ago, I am reading a bit more frequently now, which I'm really enjoying. I'm very happy with my relationship with books currently. So that's it for this book haul. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Would love to hear it. As always, links to all my social media are down in the description. I'm mostly active on Twitter and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I'd love to be friends with all of you on there. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!